Welcome back to the channel. Tonight I'm giving you a game played between GM Gelfand Boris from Israel and GM Arjun Erigaisi, the madman of India, playing on team MGD1 during the 2025 FIDE World Rapid Team Championship. Boris Gelfand was the World Chess Championship challenger in 2012 against Vishwandi Anand, and also he went on to win the 2009 Chess World Cup. So he has so many victories, especially on international scene. While Arjun Erigaisi is currently ranked world is number 4 grandmaster in rankings, a superstar in chess, especially most of people call him the madman of India. So ladies and gentlemen, I would like to share with you this game. This is going to be an interesting game, beginning from the opening, middle game strategy, and the end game analysis. So this was round 3 of the 2025 FIDE World Rapid Team Championship, which took place in London. And let's dive right into the game. GM Boris Gelfand opened the game with knight f3, and we see d5 from Arjun Erigaisi, g3, knight f6, and after bishop g2. Now we are in the territories of the king's Indian attack. The essence of this opening is that white is going to dominate on the king side and black is going to dominate on the queen side. So we see c5 as we anticipated. Short castling was played. e6, planning to develop the bishop to sit on e7 to continue with developing the pieces. c4, hitting on the center, trying to open for the bishop d4 advancement. In this position, d3 or e3 are the moves which are always anticipated in the game. In the game, GM Gelfand went on to play d3, but however, in case the opponent plays e3, then we can go and play knight c6, and after e takes d4, c takes d4, d3. This is also a playable game which can be played on, but the problem with this game is that the pawn on d3 in the future, it can become a weakness. That's why after d4, Boris played d3, and you see knight c6, e3 attacking on the center, and knight d7 trying to give room for the expansion of the pawns on the king side. Knight a3 is anticipated, followed by knight coming to c2 and supporting the b4 push. But now instead Boris went on and played b4, planning to put the bishop on b2, take control of the diagonal. And now in this position we see d takes e3, f takes e3. Now we said the rook has been opened up, and also the bishop is ready to sit on e2, take control of this diagonal. The game is becoming interesting from the start. In the case of bishop comes to e7, then you're going to advance the pawn. So taking the pawn on b4 is so prudent. C takes b4, bishop comes to b2. So the bishop is looking at the pawn is on g7. We see f5 strengthening the pawns on the queen side. Now we see d4 expanding in the center. And now we are going to see moves like knight coming to d2, knight coming to b3. In this position, Arjun played a4. a3 should have been considered, but Boris went on to play knight bd2. For example, in case of a3, knight b6, and after queen e2, defending the pawn which is on c4, b3, knight c3, and at least this is a playable variation. But however, after f4, Boris didn't bother about the pawn on a3. He played knight bd2, and Arjun went on to play a3, hitting on the bishop. So the bishop is supposed to retreat back down. a3 gives Boris the b3 square where the knight can sit in the future. So Boris first of all played bishop c1, and after bishop e7, he played knight b3. Now the knight is sitting on a very interesting square. We see short castling, and now bishop d2. Now remember the bishop has been on b2, come on c1, knight has come on d2, hitting on the pawn which is on b4. Interesting play. In this position, Arjun played e5, hitting on the center. In case of pawn comes to e5, this creates so many weak squares where black can put their pieces, because even he can also put the knight on f5, requesting for an exchange. That's why in this position, queen c2 was played, putting an eye on the pawn which is on h7, and also supporting the pawn on c4 and maintaining the tension in the center. For example, in case of pawn takes, then pawn is going to take the pawn on d5, and the bishop is going to look so beautiful on this diagonal. That's why he played queen c7. But however, h6 should have been considered, stopping any knight jumps in the future. For example, in case of h6, then we would see the rook coming to b1 or the immediate d5, knight f5, moving away from the attack and also putting an eye on the two squares. Then we see knight takes a5, queen takes a5, rook b1, and after rook e8, black will be dominating the position. Let's go back. After queen c2, he played queen c7, c5 was played. The next move to be anticipated is pawn moving on to d5 and then pawn moving on to d6, forking the queen and the bishop. That's why in this position, after pawn c5, he played knight f6. Now the knight is watching the d5 square. GM Boris Gelfand, the 2012 World Championship challenger, played knight g5. The queen and the knight are watching the h7 square. h6 can be anticipated and also g6. But however, in case of g6, then we could see queen c4, attacking the pawn which is on b4 and also willing to go ahead and advance the pawn to d5. E takes d4, e takes d4, bishop f5, rook comes into e1, rook c8, and after d5, hitting on the knight and also the pawn which is sitting on b4 is a hung pawn. Let's go back. After knight g5, Arjun played h6, and in this position, ladies and gentlemen, Boris went on and played rook takes knight f6. Fantastic move. In case of bishop takes rook, then queen h7 is checkmate. Let's go back. After rook takes f6, Arjun played h takes d5. So in this position, you just know that Arjun is fighting on in the game, move after move. Boris has dominated the game. Every chance he gets, he wants to fight on and is fighting for the kill. Boris played rook f2, planning to go ahead and put the two rooks on this beautiful column. Now we see e takes d4, e takes d4, and bishop f6. Now bishop f6, two pieces attacking the pawn. And in this position, ladies and gentlemen, Boris went on and played rook takes f6. And after g takes f6, we see that now the king side has been opened. It's very weak and it's very prone to attacks. d5. Now in case the knight moves away, the pawn which is on b4 will be a hung pawn, and also the knight can win d4 square. Knight e5, and then bishop takes b4, rook f4, attacking the bishop. Boris played queen c3, but bishop c3 should have been anticipated. For example, after bishop c3, we could say rook comes into e8, d6, hitting on the queen. Remember, the pawn is well guarded and protected by the knight which is sitting on b3. Queen comes to d7, rook f1, at least hitting on the pawn which is on f6. At least this could be a playable game. But however, after rook f4, attacking the bishop, Boris played queen c3, Arjun played rook e8, Boris played rook f1. But however, knight d4 should have been considered, rook f1, and now we see queen d8. Boris played knight d2, planning to bring the knight on e4 to hit on the pawn which is on f6. f5, taking control of the e4 square. Queen b3, attacking the rook. Arjun played rook a6, but however, b5 should have been considered. For example, after b5, en-passant is not acceptable to be taken. In case of en-passant, for example, in this position, in case of pawn en-passant, then queen check, the bishop will be a hung piece. Let's go back. He played rook a6, and now we see knight c4, knight takes c4, queen takes c4, rook comes into g6. Now rook g6 is planned to support the immediate push of the pawns. Bishop takes a3, then queen comes into e7 finally. Now it is eyeing on the check which can be on e3, bishop b2, and now we see f4 supporting the push, and after d6, queen e3 check, and in this position, rook f2 should have been considered. For example, after rook f2, b6 could be anticipated, because if pawn takes, then the rook can still take the pawn. After queen e3 check, Boris played king h1, Arjun played rook h6, putting massive force on the pawn which is on h2. So now we see in this position, queen c3 should have been considered, putting an eye and threatening checkmate in 1, but he played queen d4, and after queen takes, bishop takes. In this position, he played f takes g3. He played bishop d5, h3, then we could see g4. In case of h4, rook takes h4, king g1, rook e2, bringing the rook to hit on the bishop which is on d2, bishop d5, rook d2, attacking two bishops at the same time, bishop takes h7, king h7, rook f4, and now rook d1 check, g2, rook d2, king g1, rook d1 check, king g2, rook h2 check, and in case of king takes g3, rook d2. And if you look at the rooks, the second rank, this is the rank for winners. In a few moves, black would go on to win and dominate the game. Let's go back. F takes g3. He played bishop d7, and in this position, Arjun played rook e2, bring the rook on the rank for winners. Bishop takes f7, king h7, and in this position, he played bishop d5, bring back the bishop, and in this position, rook takes h2 is also a winning move. For example, in case of rook takes h2, king g1, bishop h3, this would be making black dominate the game. But however, after bishop d5, he played bishop e6. Bishop f3 should have been considered, but he played bishop takes b7, trying to open up for the pawns to go ahead and queen. In this position, Arjun played rook h4. Rook d1 should have been played, but he played bishop f6, which was an inaccuracy, and Arjun played rook takes h2, and after king g1, g2. In this position, after playing g2, Boris Gelfand tried and played rook f2, but however, in case of king takes the rook, pawn takes f1, queen, and that will be checkmate in 1. That's why after g2, Boris tried rook f2, and in this position, Arjun Erigaisi played rook e1 check. And in this position, Boris Gelfand resigned the game immediately, because in case of king takes f2, pawn moves to g1, queen, checkmate. Thank you so much, and I wish you the best of luck in your games. Please go ahead, like, subscribe, and comment to support the channel.